Hi, this is Rachel with Beadaholique, and in this video I want to show you how to bead weave these ombre window earrings. So this is an earring design that uses brick stitch to create a nice geometric shape, and it has a window in the middle for a pretty design element. And these earrings also feature our Miyuki Delica ombre palettes. So if you look over here, I have a pink one here, and these palettes feature 4 colors of Miyuki Delicas in size 11-0, and they fade from light to dark, and they have different finishes, so you can really play with color when you're using these palettes. Here's the purple one. So it goes from this nice soft gray all the way up to this very deep, rich silver lined violet. So this design features that ombre color scheme and also has some Swarovski crystals at the bottom for an added little dangling bit of shine. So I'm going to show you how to make the mate to this purple earring in this video. And for that you will need one Miyuki Delica ombre palette, and I'm using the purple palette, which is called Ultraviolet, and that is Pantone's 2018 color of the year, so you'll be very on trend color-wise using this palette. So you'll also need some FireLine, and I'm using the 4-pound in Smoke. You'll need some Swarovski crystal bicones, and this color is Tanzanite, a nice complementary color. You will need some silver head pins, and I'm using a 24 gauge head pin, very thin. You'll need some jump rings, and I just got one caught on my head pin there. But this is a 22 gauge jump ring, and that's going to be important because we're going to slide this jump ring through one of these size 11-0 Delica beads, so it has to be nice and thin. You'll also need some silver earring hooks. And for tools, you're going to need a size 12 beading needle, some thread snips, and a couple of pliers. You'll need flat nose and round nose, and also some flush cutters. So let's begin. To start, I cut about 5.5 feet of FireLine and threaded my needle. That's about a wingspan with both of my arms out. So I'm going to begin by making a ladder stitch base row, and I have my pattern up here. So I'm just going to be following this pattern as I go through this design. Now, if you've never done brick stitch before, you can check out our video showing you just the stitch, but I'll review for this video. You always start with a ladder stitch base row. So I'm going to start with this nice, pretty light gray, and I'm going to make a ladder stitch row of 11 beads. So to begin, I'm going to pick up 2 beads and slide them down almost to the end of my thread. I'll leave about a 4-inch tail there. So now I have my 2 beads here, and I'm just going to bend my thread so that these beads are kind of sitting next to each other. Let me just get that so you can see it clearly. Kind of like that. And now I'm going to sew up through the first bead. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So now you have the beginning of a little line here where the beads are sitting with their sides touching. So I'm going to sew back down through the second bead I strung to reinforce this beginning stitch. And at this point I'll pick up my 3rd bead. And I'm going to sew in the same direction that the thread is exiting from. So I'm going to go down through this previous bead and get my new bead on there, and then sew back up through the 3rd bead. So now you can see there are 3 beads in a row, and I'm just going to keep on using this technique until I have a base row of 11 beads. Now I have my ladder stitch base row done with 11 beads, and I'm going to move on to the 2nd row of the piece. So following the pattern, I'm going to pick up 1 gray Delica and 1 semi-matte silver lined purple Delica. And we're going to be beginning and ending the next 5 rows, or the next 4 rows, excuse me, on an increase. So again, we have another video showing you how to do brick stitch increases and decreases, but I'll just review. So for an increase at the beginning of a row, I'm going to pick up my 2 beads, and slip under the thread bridge of the first 2 beads here, so the first thread bridge in that previous row. And I'm just going to sew up again on the other side of the thread bridge through that second bead and pull. And now we have the 2 beads increasing to begin that second row. Now the rest of the second row is going to continue in this pretty silver line purple color. So I'm just going to keep going to complete the first 5 rows of the piece, following the pattern shown, increasing on the beginning and end of the row. So that was the beginning of the row, and I will show you how to increase on the end of the row. So now I'm just finishing up the second row, adding the last 2 beads. And the second to last bead is going to use that last thread bridge from the first row. But to increase on the end of a row, we need to add another bead. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. I'm going to pick up another gray bead because that will finish out the pattern of the second row. And instead of using a thread bridge, I'm going to sew into the ending bead of that first base row. And now I'm going to sew up through the second bead in the base row and out through the third bead in the second row, if that makes sense. So look what my needle's doing. I just came out the ending bead on the first row, going up through that second row, the second bead, and the third bead in on the second row. It's going to be a diagonal here. And what this is going to let me do is easily hide my thread. So now I'm coming out the third bead in the second row. I'm going to sew down into the second bead and up out the first bead, or the last bead rather. So that's how to add an extra bead to increase on the end of a brick stitch row. So I'm going to keep on following my pattern until I have 5 beads completed, increasing on the beginning and end of each row, and I'll see you back here to start building that interior window. Alright, so now I have my first 5 rows done, and you can see the ombre pattern taking shape there. So now I'm going to start building that window, and you can see in the earring that that consists of a couple of short rows on either side of the piece. So I'm going to start by doing the short rows on one side of the piece instead of moving back and forth, just because I think that makes more sense in terms of your bead weaving. So I'm going to pick up my 2 beads to start this first short row, row 6. And as usual, I'm starting with an increase because we're still widening the piece. So I just went under that first thread bridge, coming up through that second bead. And I'm going to continue with the same color graduation. So I'm getting a little bit darker as I go. And brick stitch is really wonderful for building these intricate shapes because it really lets you kind of go all over the place and kind of make the pattern of your dreams. All right, so I have one more bead in this short row of 5. All right, that was row 6, and for row 7, I'm going to start the inside on a decrease because the window gets wider following the shape of the outside of the piece. So to start from this end, I'm going to pick up 2 of these dark purple silver line beads, and instead of going under the first thread bridge, I'm going to go under the second thread bridge. All right, so the technique is a little bit different for starting on a decrease. So under the second thread bridge, back up through that second bead. But as you can see, these beads aren't really laying straight yet. So I'm going to add another action to this step. I'm going to go back down through the first bead in this row and back up again through the second bead. And when I pull now, you can see that the two beads just fall into place nicely and line up. So that is how to start the row on a decrease. So I'm going to complete up through row 10, and then I'm actually going to do the first 5 beads of row 11, and I'll show you why when I come back. Okay, so half of the window is done now. I did rows 6, 7, and 8, decreasing in the middle, and then 9, 10, and the first 5 beads of 11, increasing in the middle. So that window is going to have a nice point. And now the next step is to build this side structure on the other side of the piece. So I'm just going to weave down through the piece until I come out on this side and repeat this pattern, and then I'll show you where to go from there. And one tip is I recommend, if you're going to weave across, I would not say weaving in the first row touching the window is a good idea, because you're going to see your extra thread passes along the edge of the window. So I recommend weaving across the second row down or the third row down. All right, so I will see you back there when we're good to go over there. So now I've got rows 6 through 10 done on the other side. I just flipped my piece because I like working in this direction. And I started on row 11. And this row is going to involve a little bit of a trick, because in this row we're going to bridge across the window in the center of the piece and create the other side. So we're almost at the place where we're going to change the rules and do something a little bit special. Just adding my last few beads, starting off row 11 here. All right, going to add one more as if I'm ending the row on a decrease by sewing down into that previous bead underneath on the lower row. And I'm just going to attach it the usual way and come out that last bead that I just added. All right, so now we're here and we want to get there. So we're going to do a bridge using ladder stitch, and it's going to be very similar to how we started the piece with that initial foundation row. And I'm going to use the same color because this is a solid row of that dark violet. So what I'm going to do is pick up a single bead, and I'm going to pretend that this is just a row of ladder stitch. And I'm going to sew through that last bead in the row, the same direction as the thread. And gently turn that bead on its side. And now sew back up through that newly added bead. And there you go. It behaves just like ladder stitch. I'm going to do that again for you. Sew through the last bead added in the same direction that the thread is going. And then back down through the new bead. And we need a few more to keep bridging across the side of that window. So I'm just going to keep doing ladder stitch. And you'll know when you get to the place when you have to join this bridge with the beginning of row 11 that I started on that original side. Okay, looks like we need one more bead there. All right, back out through this bead. So it looks kind of funny when you're building it. You have this little freestanding column of ladder stitch, But now, there we go. That's enough beads to bridge over to that other side of the piece. So I'm going to flip it this way again, and sew through that last bead on the initial side, connecting the bridge to the beadwork that was already there. And I'm going to reinforce this join by sewing back through the end of the bridge, just like you would when you're doing a solid row of ladder stitch. Pull that nice and tight. And again, back up through the first bead on the other side. And now this bridge is complete. So I'm going to weave back and forth through my beads to get to the end of this row. And it works out nicely, just down, up, down, and up. I'm going to flip my piece to keep working. And now you have another base row here of ladder stitch to keep doing your brick stitch on top of. So now you're just going to keep brick stitching away as normal. Follow the pattern. So we have 4 more rows to do. And you'll just be reversing the color pattern that you did in the first half of the piece. And you're going to be beginning and ending each row on a decrease now, because now we're winding the piece down and it's getting narrower and narrower. So I'm just going to keep on going and finish up my bead weaving, and I will see you back here to show you how to complete the earring. Okay, I've now finished my bead weaving. As you can see, the piece is complete. And I went ahead and wove in and trimmed my first thread tail, but I just wanted to come back and show you the weaving in of my second thread tail. So I just went ahead and slipped my needle onto the original tail from when I started the piece, and I'm just weaving back and forth through this piece just to secure this thread before I trim it off. And I'm really just concentrating on weaving in the rows with the darker color, since this is smoke FireLine. I don't want it to show up too much against that light gray bead. So I'm just going to do a little square here, up through one bead, down through the next bead, and back up through that first bead, kind of creating a loop. And I'll go down one more time. And I'll trim my thread. And that thread tail will just hide against this dark purple bead. All right. So now the bead woven piece is complete. And the next step is adding the earring findings. So I'm going to take one of my jump rings, and now you're going to see why it was important to use a very thin gauge jump ring. This is 22 gauge, because it's going to fit through a delicate bead. So I'm just going to open that jump ring, and I'm going to feed it through the delica on the point of this bead woven piece, and it just fits. Now I'm going to take an earring hook, and I'm just going to slip the loop onto the jump ring and close the jump ring up. All right, so that's the top of the piece. And now for the bottom of the piece, I have these 3 little dangling Swarovski crystals. So I'm just going to make those dangles. Take a couple of crystals, place one onto a head pin, I'm going to take my round nose pliers and get them ready. First, I'm just going to make a little bend with my flat nose pliers right above the crystal. Grab the wire with the round nose pliers. I'm just going to make a simple wire loop. Just wrap that wire around. I'm going to come in with my flush cutters and cut the extra wire off. And I'll just close up that loop. All right, I'm going to do that 2 more times. Okay, now I've got my 3 little dangling crystals ready to go. So I'm going to take another jump ring. And I'll open that jump ring, and I'm going to feed it through the delica on the bottom point of the bead woven piece. And I'm just going to place all of my little crystal dangles onto that jump ring before I close it up. All right, so that's how to make an ombre window earring using brick stitch. And you can see the bands of color just fade really nicely from that dark, rich violet to the lighter color, and that's the benefit of these gorgeous ombre palettes. One tip is if you want to dress up this design, you can incorporate a metallic seed bead color into your design. So if you want to use silver findings, you would include silver seed beads because it's a good idea to match. And if you want to do gold findings, just put in a few rows of gold seed beads. I think that would look really beautiful. The other good thing about this earring design is that it won't droop. A lot of times when you have a bead woven earring, it kind of sags toward the middle, but because of the structure of this piece, it will really just keep its shape really nicely. So you can find all of these supplies at Beadaholique.com. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.